Welcome to the show. That picture you might remember, those of you that are old enough, was Emmett Till in 1955. I happen to have been 14, which was his age at that year, and I remember that vivid picture of Emmett Till in the centerfold of Jet magazine. So what we're going to do is take you back to that era of, it seems to be coming back to us. Let's take a videotape, take a look at the videotape of Emmett Till. All right? And we'll be right back at you. Thank you.
And he said, "This is Mr. Bryan. I want to talk with you and the boy." And when I opened the door, there was a man standing with a pistol in one hand and a flashlight in the other hand. And he asked me, did I have two boys there from Chicago? I told him I have. And he said, I want the boy that done all that talk. And they marched him to the car, and they asked someone there, was this is the right boy? And the answer was, here. And they drove toward money.
And I found out about it 9:30 Sunday morning. I was in bed. I got up, called my mother when I got the news, because I had every decision I had ever made or every crack that I had ever been in, it took her to get me out of it. And I took that one to Mama, too, because I didn't know what to do. Mother told me to come right over, and she would start making calls. And I got over there as quickly as I could make it. And that wasn't very long.
By this time, everyone in Money knew what had happened. Emmett Till had broken one of segregation's rules. He talked fresh to a white woman in a store. He was only 14, he was a Northerner, and he didn't understand.
He went into the store to buy some candy. Before then, he had showed the boys around his age, he had some picture of some white kids that he had graduated from. That was, female and male. So he told the boys down there, they got around the store. It must have been around about maybe 10 to 12, youngsters around there. That the girls was his girlfriend, So one of the local boys said, hey, there's a girl in their store there, so I bet you want to go in there and talk to her, So he went in there to, get some candy. So when he was leaving out the store, after buying the candy, he told us, say, bye, baby. And the next thing I knew, one of the boys came up to me and say, man, you got a crazy cousin. He just went in there and said bye to that white woman. And that's when this man I was playing checker with, this older man, I guess he must have been around about 60 or 70, he jumped straight up and said, boy, say, y'all better get out of here. Say, that lady come out of that store and blow y'all brains off.
Wednesday, the sheriff came and told me they had found the body at Phillip and wanted me to go and identify the body, which I did. And we found the body, which didn't have on any clothes at all. The body was so badly damaged that we couldn't hardly just tell who he was. But he happened to have on a ring with his initials, and that cleared it up.
The body was shipped home, back north to Chicago, where Mamie Till Bradley insisted on an open casket funeral. So all the world can see, she said, what they did to my boy.
I'm left in this wide world alone.
Jet magazine showed Till's corpse, beaten, mutilated, shot through the head. A generation of black people would remember the horror of that photo.
No, for tomorrow.
I believe that the whole United States is mourning with me. And if the death of my son can mean something to the other unfortunate people all over the world, then for him to have died a hero would mean more to me than for him just to have died.
Roy Bryant, husband of the woman in the store, and J.W. Milam, her brother-in-law, were arrested for the murder of Emmett Till. The trial was held in nearby Sumner, Mississippi. Black organizations like the NAACP and the Black Press were especially interested, and they worked hard to keep the case in the news, to make an example of Southern racism for the world.
It was because it was a boy that they went there. They had to prove that they were superior. They had to prove it by taking away a 14-year-old boy. You know, it's in the virus, it's in the blood of the Mississippian. He can't help it.
I'd like for the NAACP or any colored organization anywhere to know that we are here giving all parties a free trial and intend to give a fair and impartial trial. And we don't need the help of the NAACP, and we don't intend for them to help us. We never have any trouble until some of our southern niggas go up north and the NAACP talks to them and they come back home.
I had covered the courts in many areas of this country, but the Till case was unbelievable. I mean, I just didn't get the sense of being in a courtroom. It was, first place, segregated. The black press sat at a bridge table far off from the court, and the boy's mother came down. They sat her there at the bridge table with us. Plus, the United States Congressman, at that time, Diggs, he came down, and I was the one that got him in because the sheriff wouldn't let him in. He said to the deputy that he called over, he said, "This nigger here said there's a nigger outside who says that he's a congressman, and he has corresponded with the judge, and the judge had told him to come on down, and he would let him in." He said, but the sheriff won't let him in, so he's sending his card up there. So this guy said, "A nigger congressman?" And he said, "That's what this nigger said." So I said, my God, I have never seen anything like this in my life.
There was, of course, a lot of buzzing when I entered the place and was placed in that area, and I think the judge said something about, yeah, have that boy come on up here and sit down over here with these news reporters, you know.
What do you intend to do here today?
To answer any questions that the attorneys might ask me to answer. To the
How
best,
do you think you could possibly be a help to them?
I don't know. I mean, just by answering whatever questions that they ask me.
Do you have any evidence bearing on this case?
I do know that this is my son.
The defense argued that the body found tied to the cotton gin fan in the river was so disfigured that it could not be identified as Emmett Till. The trial took 5 long, hot days. Because of threats to his life, the prosecution's star witness, Mose Wright, was kept hidden out of state.
Will you go back to Mississippi to testify in the kidnap trial?
Sure, I'll go back because I promised the sheriff I'll be back. And so if I live, I'm going back to testify. And after the trial, well, I'm through with Mississippi forever and ever. Didn't have my part in Mississippi. I'm through it. I don't want nothing to happen.
At the time, I really didn't realize how brave my grandfather Mose Wright was, you know. But after I got older, I realized that he was a brave man. He was a mighty brave man to travel back down there, you know, among all those hostile peoples and testify and get him in court and point his finger at a white man and accuse him of murder.
He was called upon to testify as to could he see anybody in the courtroom, identify anybody in that courtroom that had come to his house that night and got the Emmett Till out. He stood up, and there was a tension in the courtroom, and he says in his broken language, "Dahi."
Dahi, there he is.
That was my experience when I was 14. Now, that was a hard, I don't know if you got a really good shot of, now that shot of Emmett Till's corpse was in the centerfold of Jet magazine. Now, I remember, that's buried in my memory bank. And I happened to have been 14 at that time, so I was the same age. And this we're going to update it now. This is how I feel about the Diallo case. I think this is just another example of what goes around. I mean, it's coming back. Now, this is up south. Now, police officers get away with shooting down an innocent man in the hallway 41 times. They get off scot-free. What's the state of America, Professor Smalls? Well, our subject today is going to be crime in the black community.
The state of America is no crime in the urban community.
Mm-hmm.
We focus on crime in the black community, and then you get off track. We're going to switch your topic.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
To crime in the urban community. So crime in America. Remember, America was started by criminals. America was run as a criminal enterprise. They came and they stole the land of someone else.
Okay.
They murdered nearly 80 million of that population. The world act like it didn't happen. So you create a criminal enterprise with criminals. Most of the white Americans came to America from the prisons of Europe.
Okay.
They got rid of their prison excess by putting them on boats and sending them to this new land, which didn't belong to them. They came, they murdered the indigenous population and took their land. So America begun as a criminal enterprise. And then the criminals that they sent to do the dirty work, that the British sent to do the dirty work, then turned on the master criminal. And then the minor criminals broke away from the master criminal and created their own criminal institution called a country. The 13 colonies, so-called, becoming the United States. If we're not going to be clear on that, and while they were carrying out these criminal acts against the native population, they were enslaving and genociding the African population, extending their criminal behavior.
Okay.
And doing all of this in the name of being good Christians.
Amen.
All right? So we got to be honest about what America really is. Forget about the idealism they put on paper, because when they were putting the idealism on paper, they had hundreds of thousands of other human beings enslaved with no rights whatsoever, while murdering millions of others, at the same time talking about humanity and human rights and dignity. So we're dealing with a hypocritical criminal enterprise that has as one of its most unique features as a nation state, organized crime being dominant in its fiber to the point they cannot extract it from the body politic of the nation. That's America. Then you have the white ethnic groups that run the organized criminal network, having their ethnic relatives running the law enforcement network. And we ask, why is there a problem in America? America's a criminal enterprise that has bullied its way to legitimacy in the world.
But from the Emmett Till days to now, they seem to have supposedly given us a little freedom.
No,
with
the white folks never gave us nothing. We took every square inch, every ounce of whatever so-called freedom we have. We took it. We took it through pickets, through boycotts, through fighting, through burning, and through shooting. We took it through demonstration. We took it through taking beatings. We took it to being lynched, being murdered by them. We never stopped demanding our rights as human beings. They never gave us nothing. And so we took it. They had to relent in order to have some stability in their criminal enterprise. That is called a nation state.
What about other white Americans that believe in freedom in America?
I don't know any white Americans that believe in freedom. If they do, they should be martyrs, having been killed fighting for freedom in America. So, and don't mention John Brown, because John Brown was fighting for white folks in Kansas. He simply saw freeing black folks as a way to keep the slave masters and the big rich white people from taking control of Kansas, where poor whites was trying to make a living.
Now Malcolm that was one of Malcolm's heroes.
Malcolm made mistakes, otherwise he wouldn't be dead. I love Malcolm, but I'm not going to make him God. Malcolm was a hell of a brother.
No.
But he made some serious critical errors, both in judgment, and he was operating for history about John Brown and Malcolm.
All right.
You know? So, to bring it more parochial, the way people might, African Americans accept post-slavery trauma syndrome as being the primary feature of their psycho-spiritual character. Okay?
Explain that. Let's break that
Okay.
down.
African Americans are African human beings who was captured in raids and wars, who was beaten, raped, mutilated, tortured, and genocide even before having been brought here, and then went through the process of rape, mutilation, terrorism, and genocide, both psychologically and physically, while here for hundreds of years. In the process of that, to survive, they had to make certain compromise within their minds, within their spirits, and within their intellectual view of the world. They had to make certain compromise in how they saw themselves and how they saw their murderer and rapists. And those compromises allowed them to form false partnership with their rapists and murderers in order to survive.
Right.
Today, we make assumptions based on our fear, our ignorance, and the post-slavery trauma, meaning those habits and behaviors learned during slavery in order to survive, that has been carried over as normal cultural reaction to everyday things.
Example of how a black would respond.
Okay, I'll give you an example just based on my experience. I was born in a place called Acadia Plantation in Georgetown, South Carolina.
Right.
75 to 80% of the young men in that community were shipped away at 18, so that we wouldn't have to be caught up challenging with our manhood the white supremacist system and ending up dead.
Okay.
What that did is destroy the basis of the black family. That goes on from the 20s until now, in terms of much of the southern population. Another thing is how black boys were handled. We suffered more severe punishment, corporal punishments, to subdue our natural aggression so that we won't get in conflict with white men. But what happens then when we get out into the rest of the world, when that natural male aggression is needed and necessary, but it's been beaten out of you by your family so you can survive?
Okay.
Then people say you don't have the motivation. How can you have the motivation when the cultural trend in the black community is to make you submit to white male dominance in order for you to simply to survive? And that becomes a part of the socialization process at the physiological level, at the psychological level. It has an emotional effect on you. It has a psychological effect on you. It is emulated or demonstrated in how you're taught in the church, your spiritual institution, how you're taught in the schools. And so you come out understanding that you must learn how to measure your behavior relative to what whites are willing to tolerate before they react in a deadly manner towards you. And this is not just white individuals or white ethnic groups or white community. This is white people in general and the state, the government itself, which is white dominated. So there's no government you can go and appeal to because the government is the same white supremacist reaction to your presence.
Well, I'm referring to the Emmett Till piece again. Now, I remember the way the mood of the country.
I remembered it too. I remember seeing that picture in chat. I remember seeing that mutilated face beaten out of shape, almost out of recognition. And it was in a casket. I was a little boy, about 12 years old.
I mean, because we were molded by movies in those days, and all the movies had us all pacified, and Tarzan was quite popular back then, and we didn't know anything about our African history.
Well, see, I didn't know about Tarzan and movies because we didn't have television on the plantation where I live, and we didn't get to go to town to movies.
So you were closer to this Emmett Till environment than I was.
I lived in the heart of what an Emmett Till environment was.
Okay.
I lived in Georgetown County, South Carolina, which was the Rice Belt.
Okay.
And I lived on a plantation which was called Acadia, but that was a combination of 7 rice plantations that sat side by side another 40 rice plantations that stretched for more than nearly 100 miles, just rice plantations. That
so you were 10 back in those days? Doing Emmett Till?
I was about 10 years old, 10, 11 years old. Right? It wasn't new to us because you remember Albert King, the saxophone player, the trumpet player?
Okay.
His father was my mother's first cousin, and he lived on that plantation and had been murdered some years earlier by the white community because he tried to run for the city council. Another man named Mr. Fat Eye was lynched a year or two before the Emmett Till thing in the same area because they said he raped a white woman in this junkyard. Later, as I was an adult, of course, about 10, 15 years ago, the white woman's brother-in-law on his deathbed admitted to the murder. But the black man is very dead, so I grew up in the middle of that sort of thing. But at the same time, I grew up in an African village, side the river, in the woods, in the swamp of South Carolina. So my view of the world was a little different from an urban black person. I didn't even know there was such a thing as a New York City. I mean, I had no concept of what I learned in '63 when I first came to the city.
Well, you know, Sugar Hill, where we live, where you live now, when this happened, you know, on that block on Amsterdam Avenue where I was raised, you had nothing but white merchants and nothing but Irish policemen, and you walk over to Broadway, and that whole neighborhood was all white.
Right.
So I mean, I was part of an integrated society. So
no,
when this
you were
came,
not. You were part of a segregated society up north.
They had me completely brainwashed with this American ideal.
Right.
And when this happened, this Emmett Till happened, it blew my mind. I didn't believe that sort of stuff happened.
Right. See, it happened here in New York. White cops, while you were growing up, was murdering black men, but you were made to believe that those black men that was being murdered were criminals.
Right.
And so their murder was justifiable. In the South, it was a little more overt, whereas in New York, it was a little more covert.
Right.
But I guarantee you that the New York City policemen killed and lynched more black men than the policemen in the state of Mississippi.
We never heard about it.
Right.
We never heard about
You heard about it, but it was handled as police versus criminals.
Yeah.
Whereas in Mississippi, it was handled as white folks versus niggas. And it had the same effect. And so what we've got to begin to do, what African Americans got to begin to do, is stop lying to themselves.
Okay.
Stop accepting the lies of their lives and begin to accept the truth and the reality of their lives. If you've got a nephew, a son, a daughter, a cousin on drugs, admit it. That's your blood. That's your family. Your family have been damaged.
Right.
If you've got children in jail, you got nephews, you got cousins, admit it. That's a part of your family that's been damaged. That's a part of this incarceration process. We have to begin to admit the truth about ourselves. If you are an alcoholic, if you once were an alcoholic, if you once were in jail, one of the things that made Malcolm so strong, Malcolm admitted the reality of his life.
Right.
And that made him a very powerful personality because he admitted to the reality of their lives. We're walking around in this fantasy world like we're somehow separate from those who have been debilitated by the system. Yet the effects of our children, our nephews, our cousins, our brothers, our sisters being on drugs or in the penal system pulls on us financially, pulls on us psychologically, pulls on us emotionally, and certainly affects us socially. Okay? Right. And we need to look and say, what is the cause of this debilitation in the black family, in the black community, or first start with the community of one, the community of self, in the black personality. What is the cause of these things? And begin to understand that the first thing you've got to accept is that white supremacy as an ideology is the dominant socializing instrument in North America. It's in everything, every TV commercial, every movie, the way they design housing, the way community is designed, the attitude of doctors, the attitudes of lawyers, the perception in the courts, all is dominated by white supremacy in terms of their expression towards people African. We run around referring to Diallo as the African. Then what are we? I can't even imagine a Chinese person would refer to another Chinese as the Chinese, you know, as though they were something different. But the damage that white supremacy and slavery has imposed on the Africans who are living in America is catastrophic. So they tried to hide facing the damage by saying, well, I'm a Christian. What does that mean? One thing about Christianity is that you face truth and that you stand up against oppression. Christ and his 12 disciples, I'm not a Christian, be very clear. I'm what my ancestors was before. We knew God before we met the white folks in this Christianity. Christianity is not about whites' interpretation of how we should worship God. I'm not necessarily interested in their interpretation of how I should worship God. Not when he comes with the murder, pillage, genocide, and plunder of tens of millions of people dripping down his hands and his face. He can't talk to me about God. He can't talk to me about how to worship God.
For the most part,
but I'm not going to let you off. Okay. I know you're a good Christian, and I respect that. I know that that's earnest on your part. But I'm going to be honest on my part about why I won't be there. The point I'm making is that these people who are telling us about crime are the criminals. I want to show you something. There's a book out, and I want the cameraman to pick up the title of this book. This is called Crime in the United States. And it's called the Uniform Crime Reports. Now, this is put out every year by the Justice Department and FBI. And I used to teach a course on crime in the urban community at City College. Okay. So I've been buying them for about 10, 12 years, looking at the stats. I just want to show you just a couple of general stats. And we'll just look at city arrests. Now, what they do in this report, they show you who was arrested in America. Not who was suspected of crime, who was arrested. The total crime committed in cities distributed by race in 1998, 1,516,119. The arrests, 1,058,851 whites were arrested. 416,888 blacks was arrested. So why isn't that reflected in the prison system?
Wait a minute, say that again. You mean out of 1.5 million people arrested,
1
million of them were white?
Were whites. But that's not reflected in the penal system. They were arrested for these crimes, all right?
They actually have statistics like that?
Yes, they actually have statistics like that.
How is that possible?
Because this is what the FBI and them others do. Let me show you again. Let me show you another piece of that stat. Now, in suburban America, where the goody-goodies live, right? 3,690,000 crimes were committed last year. 2,825,000 whites were arrested for those crimes. Why isn't that reflected in the prison system? In suburban America, 813,000 blacks were arrested. Now, this is in 98, okay? So what we've got to ask, if they're arresting these people, how come they're not showing up in the penal system? Now let's go to 88, the same Uniform Crime Report, okay, that came out in 88. Let's look at the stats. Now, city arrests was 7,938,000. 7,938,000.
That means you've gone back 10 years.
Huh?
You've gone back 10 years.
10 years. Okay. And
12 years, okay.
And out of that 7 million, oh, I got to get this right, because I don't want to give those folks nothing they don't deserve. Okay, let's do the suburban one piece, and then I'll come to the city. In the suburban one, 1,368,000 crimes are committed, right? 1,088,000 whites are arrested. So why aren't these people in the prison system? 269,000 blacks are arrested. So something's wrong, okay? Now, in the city, let me see if I can get the racial breakdown of the city. Okay, in the city, 8 million crimes are committed in 88. 8,443,000. 5,736,000 whites are arrested. 2,556,000 blacks are arrested.
And 95% of the prison system are black and Hispanic.
Yes. Whites represented arrests in 88
67.9%. So why don't they represent that population in the prison? That's just the city. In the suburban area,
who puts this out?
this is put out by the Justice Department and the FBI. Most black people don't even know such a thing exists. The Uniform Crime Report is published every year there. And there's another good book people need to get. It's called Criminalization of the Race by Dr. Shashi McIntyre, where Dr. McIntyre shows in her research that the penal system in America was designed to incarcerate, was invented to incarcerate free blacks and then rent them out as indentured labor to the same plantations they had either escaped from or bought their way from. So when we start talking about crime in the black community or crime in the urban community, we really got to look at who the criminals are. This city is run by white ethnic groups. A certain white ethnic group run the school system. They're predominant. Another white ethnic group, different from that group, runs the fire department. They're predominant. Another white ethnic group runs the police department. They're predominant. Now, why aren't we asking a question why certain white ethnic group control the sanitation, another white ethnic group control the fire department, another white ethnic group control the police department, another white ethnic group control education?
Well, people say that's the way it used to be.
No, that's the way it is today.
Well, the Irish used to control the police department.
They still do. Isn't it strange that the ethnic group that control drug distribution in America, their members also control the drug and investigating arm of the police department? Isn't that interesting?
We're talking about the mafia?
You could call them whatever you want.
Organized crime?
Right.
Okay.
Okay. And the ethnic group that manages the bookkeeping and investment for the other ethnic group that run the organized crime are the same ethnic group that run the court system and predominate as judges and lawyers and district attorney. Isn't that interesting? And the victims of all of this is black folks. This ethnic group sells drugs to the black community. This ethnic group prosecute the black folks for using and distributing the drugs within their community, and they work together to run the major criminal enterprise, because certainly the billions from drugs is not in the black community.
That's for sure.
Then you get to a situation like Mr. Diallo. Did he walk in on a drug deal in the Bronx? Did the district attorney in the Bronx hold back information from the witnesses of what they said they saw that night?
Are you speculating?
I'm speculating.
Okay.
I wasn't up there. But I know if we brought, it would seem that somebody should go talk to Larry Davis, especially in the light of the second shooting of a young man who they claim was a heroin dealer, who was arrested just that Friday for being in, or Saturday for being in a demonstration for Diallo. Did he have something? The second young man, that's right, he was arrested on either Saturday or Friday for being involved in a demonstration against the police department.
All right, so everybody has suggested, I'm sorry Graham's not here today, that Diallo was a hit. They're saying that was
the wrong
hit.
They
But they got the wrong
Larry
person.
Davis. Larry Davis tried to tell the black and the white community of this city that he was committing contract murders and doing drugs for the police department.
Okay,
and that they came to kill him. We ignored him because we didn't want to face the truth of the filth in that police department.
How long ago was that?
There are good cops out there.
Remind us how long
How
ago.
long it's been? 10, 12 years
Yeah,
now?
at least that.
Okay. There are very good policemen out here. There's some fine cops, black, whites, Latinos. I know some of them. But they're terrified by the criminals in the police department. And the leadership of that department protect the criminals, because many of that leadership came through those criminal behavior to get to the top. And so we've got a community who either we have to pick up arms and go after the police to feel safe, or we have to sit there and leave our lives in jeopardy to police criminal behavior because the other policemen are afraid of the criminal policemen. That's a terrible situation. They talk about Russia, Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, Cuba. Are they crazy? Then they got this thing about leave America. No, let the criminals leave America. Let those who violate the Constitution of the United States, let them leave America. Let those who usurp the power of government to misuse as a criminal enterprise against a legitimate citizen of this nation leave America. Not those who criticize them for their criminal behavior and attitudes. That goes for Schaefer down to the mayor. You know, you can't mask your criminal behavior by appealing to the fear of white insecurity.
Well, that's what they're doing.
Yeah, But the white community have to take responsibility. Why are they so insecure? What is it that they're insecure about?
They know they're wrong?
They know their relatives who are involved in criminal activities. They know who's running the unions.
They're
It is their
benefiting from
families.
all this.
They're benefiting from
Okay.
all of it.
All right.
They're benefiting from the abuse to the black population. The
Why
white
is-
community in general benefits, know they're benefiting, accept the benefits, and then pretend they're intimidated by people trying to resist the tyranny that comes on them in order to benefit the greater white community.
And the Diallo case is a classic example of that.
The classic example is that they didn't go to the black judge because they couldn't buy her off, obviously, because she obviously had integrity. And her integrity was not going to allow them to escape. They didn't want to go to Albany because of the jury. They wanted to go to Albany because they needed a judge that could put it in a context that no jury could come back with a guilty verdict. And they got one.
So you don't blame the 4 black females on the jury?
I don't blame them, but they have to take responsibility for knowing a truth and not dealing with it, because they're questions they were obligated to ask. But the judge put the entire jury in a position where they couldn't come back with anything but innocent.
Were you surprised that they came back?
No.
You weren't surprised
I
at
was
all?
actually very happy that they came back with that verdict. Why?
You expected that?
Of course.
You really expected that?
Our people need to have a wake-up call.
Oh, wow, what a wake-up call.
They needed a wake-up call.
Man.
How we can sit back and pretend. You know, take a city college. When I came to city college, it sat in the middle of Harlem. That was 25 years ago. It had 25,000 students, and less than 300 was black and Puerto Rican, and it sat in the middle of the largest black and Puerto Rican community in North America.
Right.
It has almost returned to that. The faculty at City has never stopped being any less than 80% whites. In the middle of the biggest black and Latino community.
Right.
Where they did blacken up, it was only in black studies and special programs. White supremacy and white dominance over tax-supported institution in the black community that our money pays for is atrocious. And these thieves live very well in their community with what they steal from the taxpayers in the black community. And I'm sick of it. And then they use the media to criminalize me, to make my image negative and make the criminal image of their community positive. They even have programs on TV about organized criminals as though they're folk heroes.
Right, exactly.
Making folk heroes out of murderers and thieves and
The
extortionists.
Godfather. That's
Okay. By whatever name
Yeah.
they make the movies
Right.
or the sitcom. But to legitimize criminals, all right? To make slavery seem like something nice. The Jewish community right now, and people are afraid to mention the Jewish community by name, the Jewish community is fighting right now against Poland to have artifacts taken during the Nazi tyranny returned. The Jewish community fought to have gold that was taken by the Nazis returned to them and was successful. They fought to have art objects and paintings returned. They fought to have insurance company pay off on their debt. They fought to have industry in Europe who had enslaved them pay reparations. And that same community will stand up in defiance and against African American people who lost hundreds of millions of people for wanting the same thing. And somebody need to ask a question. Why is this hypocrisy so acceptable? And why do black people, how can they stand and accept one community being able to be, have their aggrievedness reparated, why another community, which is even more aggrieved for a much longer period of time, should not even raise the issue of reparations?
right.
Okay?
Right.
And so I'd ask the question of the Jewish community, where did you get all that gold? There's no gold mine in Israel. And you didn't even occupy Israel during the Nazi Holocaust. Where did the gold come from that you're fighting for from Geneva? Do I then have a right to fight to have that gold returned to the Congo, returned to Ghana, returned to South Africa from those who it was stolen from?
Okay.
See, we don't, this post-slavery trauma that we caught in don't allow us to ask the right question. So people tell us we're criminals and we try to defend that. You know, a criminal? I'm not a criminal. I'm the descendant of a prisoner of war who was enslaved in North America. I am currently a refugee because I was never given a plebiscite. That means a choice, a legal choice to have my economic, political, cultural, and linguistic integrity restored to me after slavery so that I could make a choice to go back home once it was established where I was brought from in the records of the enslavers. Nobody gave me that opportunity. And though I've been the better citizen in North America, I still have the government who I'm the better citizen in. Because no white group led the movement to enfranchise black voters. There were a few whites who came along with us, and I praise them. Not their group, but those individuals I praise for having come along and participated in the voter registration and the marches in the South with Dr. King and others. But nowhere does that vindicate the white community.
There's so few of them now.
There was few then. But the bottom line is crime is a multi-trillion-dollar enterprise in America.
Definitely.
All right? And that alone tell you black folks ain't even in on crime. Black folks are reacting from the pathology of white criminality that affects them in their community. Let me say that again. Black folks is reacting from the pathology of white criminality that affects them in their community.
As usual, Professor Smalls is giving us a history lesson in our psychic here in America. Welcome to the show, Graham Weatherspoon.
Brother Graham, good to see you, sir.
You missed quite a bit, guy. I mean, woo, this is heavy. We started off with Emmett Till. Old clip from '55 showing Emmett Till and what happened to Emmett Till.
Let me tell Brother Graham, my son, who's with me at the breakfast on Friday morning, when I introduced you to him, he walked away, he says, he's a cop? I said, yeah, he was a cop. I said, he's retired now. He said, he had his hair like that? I go, yeah, he's got that beard too. I said, yeah, that's what his other brother said. Everybody on the force is not corrupt, you know? And we want to say that all the time, but we also want to say that people got to address the corrupt ones.
Right.
We can't take the good cop and make him cover for the corrupt cop, because the corrupt cop is endangering the life of the good cop.
Right.
And both their behavior, one for doing criminal activity and the other for hiding his eyes to it, is endangering the citizenry of New York City.
Right.
See?
Well, we'd like to bring out what I'd like you to reflect on how the police community is reacting to this Diallo verdict.
You know, it's very broad. There are a lot of officers who are outraged over the verdict themselves, white and black, because it was quite obvious to them that this was a crime. And it's interesting, I was on PowerPoint Radio down in Atlanta this weekend, and there was a reporter from the New York Post who was also on, and she stated an interesting point, which I had gotten from some federal sources, but I didn't make public, but since she did, I'll get to it. The problem in the initial phase of this case was that the assistant district attorneys who were assigned to prosecute this case stated they didn't want to prosecute it because they didn't want to prosecute a case against a police officer.
Okay.
And this is a very serious issue here.
Okay.
And it shows our community, not that we didn't know, but it shows us up front the problems within this system, wherein an assistant district attorney is going to say to the district attorney, I don't want to do my job. I don't want to do my job because I want to prosecute certain people, but I don't want to prosecute others. I want to be a finder of fact in some cases, but I don't want to be a finder of fact in all cases.
Why? Because the prosecutors need the police department,
right.
Basically. Okay.
And I've done cases myself and investigations where it turned out the bad guy was a police officer, more than once. Those guys had to go to prison for what they did. They crossed the line. And I'm not going to sit here and defend them or justify anything that they did. They crossed the line, they have to take the penalty. And if the district attorney of the Bronx County can't run his office, there's a problem here.
Right.
They should have been told specifically, you swore to take an oath, and this is a point. Nobody's been drafted to do any of this work. I wasn't drafted to be a police officer. They weren't drafted to become an assistant district attorney. That was a conscious choice on their part. And if you don't wish to fulfill that obligation, you need to pack up and get out of Dodge. And that's what the DA should have told these people. That case was handed from one person to the next, to the next, to the next, till it got to Levin and Warner.
Why didn't Johnson prosecute?
That's my question. Then I'd have to ask, Who's running that office? If Robert Johnson can't give orders to his personnel and they don't want to follow
Well, why didn't he do it
should be out of
himself?
there.
Why didn't he do it himself?
I don't know. I can't answer that question.
I think only Johnson could answer that question. But Johnson, this is not the first time that cases were taken away from him, critical cases that questioned where the state, where the governor, where the mayor questioned his integrity as a district attorney, and he has not reacted forcefully enough, in my opinion, to those officials from the white community who feel because he's an African in that office that his integrity when it comes to sitting in judgment of whites is at stake. And he accepts that as a normal behavior on the part of the government, and it is not normal, because I've never seen it done to another district attorney in that state.
Not at all. And it was the people of the Bronx County who elected him to be their district attorney. It wasn't Pataki.
Right.
It wasn't Giuliani.
Right.
It wasn't anybody but the people of that county. And those are the people that he holds that obligation to serve. Not the head, the administrative law judge, or any of those people.
But what has occurred in America, like in most fascist nations, the law enforcement agency has become a cult unto itself. Mm-hmm. A cult with no allegiance to the state, a cult with no allegiance to the people who pay them, a cult with no allegiance to the law they're supposed to enforce, a cult with no allegiance to the humanity that is represented by those laws, but a cult whose only commitment is to their own self-advancement and own empowerment. And when when law enforcement agencies reach that level, you are bordering on fascism, or you are indeed in a fascist state. And in America, this cult is not local or regional like it was decades ago. It is national and international in scope and character. The personality of the police departments nationally is dictated by a single national and international unit made up of police chiefs from around the country. And it's a very dangerous thing. It is a very powerful thing. It is not new. They assassinate who they want, including a president of the United States, I'm sure, if they wish to do it, and they'll get away with it. They can assassinate a Malcolm X, they can assassinate a Dr. King, and they can get away with it. News media, based on white supremacist value system, identify with the behavior of these law enforcement cults that are now dominating America in the same way they dominated Uganda, Nigeria, and Rwanda. And if we don't watch out, we're going to get the same results.
You think Reverend Sharpton is in jeopardy?
He has always been in jeopardy.
Yes.
And I have sat with him in the past and told him emphatically that when he was stabbed in Brooklyn years ago, that wasn't the act of some mental patient.
Right.
That man was allowed into that schoolyard. He was wearing a blue blazer or a parka similar to the one that the community affairs officers were wearing.
You think it was a
I knew for a fact from working on the Tawana Brawley case that at the same time Stephen Pagonis was spending time in Brooklyn and had threatened the life of Al Sharpton, Reverend Sharpton. This is prior to the stabbing.
Okay.
You remember Martin Luther King was stabbed.
Right here in New York.
By a black woman.
So-called irate.
And the thing is that we have to remember that Denmark Vesey wound up in his plight because there were people who were more concerned with Master than they were concerned with their own people. There are police officers who have been murdered in Rockland County. The district attorney up there is named Grady. He has not investigated any of those cases, and those were murders of white police officers. Not one of those cases has been investigated. Death certificates and forensic evidence has been suppressed in all of those cases with the assistance of the former Attorney General of the state of New York, Dennis Vacco. And another thing you have to look at is the workings not only of the government but of business. Last week in California, Proposition 21, Hilton Hotels. Hilton Hotels was the main backer behind Proposition 21 in California. What is Proposition 21? That juveniles will be tried as adults and sent to state prisons in California. What concern is it for Hilton hotels to get involved in legislation concerning the prosecution
They're
of
going to buy the
juveniles
prisons?
because they're involved in the building of prisons. And we have to start identifying the corporations that are seeking to make money off of 20th, 21st century slavery, which is going on in the prison systems in this country.
You didn't hear Professor Smalls talk about crime in the United States on your uniform crime report, showing the statistics of 1.5 million people arrested.
The number of whites arrests
and
to
1 million
blacks
whites
is better than 2 to 1
It has to
in
be.
almost any year. But they're not showing up in the prison system for the same crimes.
It has to be.
For the
There are
same
not
crime.
enough black people in this country for us to support the criminal stats that are going on in this country. You don't hear about serial killers and rapists that roam through the heartland of this country. There are some crazy white people out here. They are killing people, butchering people, skinning people, doing all sorts of crimes, roaming from state to state. But you don't hear about that. You'll see what the New York Post, the Times, the Newsday, and all these daily news will try to project a negative image of our people. But we don't have enough people in this country to support all of the criminal acts that are going on in this country.
But what I'd like to say is that the key to this whole business is for African American peoples to accept the fact of their Africanness, for African Caribbean people to stop playing their games when they come to North America, because if their stuff is that hooked up, they didn't have to come to North America because they already own their countries. Why don't they build their economic bases where they're at? They had to leave their countries because they don't have the capabilities to build here. So why come to America and pretend?
Explain
and
that.
Set up,
Explain that.
let me explain.
Okay.
The African community in America is the only community where new arriving Africans set up separate communities. The Italian community comes into America and become a part of the Italian community.
Right.
The Chinese community comes in America and become a part of the Chinese community. The Korean community comes to America and become a part of the Korean community, but not the African community. The African community from the Caribbean and from the continent is tutored before they get here not to set up community with the African indigenous American community.
Such as 116th Street and
well, we could pick any incident all over
Harlem.
Brooklyn.
Okay.
And matter of fact, it's even worse than that. The African community from Jamaica does not set up with the African community from Trinidad.
Divide and conquer.
Sure.
And so until that questions get resolved in the African community, and an accent does not determine your ethical, moral, racial character. Okay. So if I got an accent that I borrowed from the Irishman in Jamaica, that accent makes me different from the black in Grenada who has an accent borrowed from the Welshman from Britain, we got a problem. Because the things that's different about us is the things that's white about us. Right. Let me say it again. The things that's different about Africans from Jamaica, from New York, from South Carolina, from Nigeria and Ghana is the white things about us. The things that...
The white influences.
No, the white things about us. The white attitude, the white behavior, the white manner of dressing, the white manner of perceiving reality, the white worldview we picked up from an Anglican or Catholic or whatever church that molded our consciousness and subconsciousness. We are white, for the most part, masquerading as black because biology dictates that masquerade. And we need to get real about the damage that slavery and colonialism have done. An African coming from Nigeria will refer to himself when he gets to North America as an African, but in Nigeria he refers to himself as a Nigerian or an Igbo or a Yoruba. He doesn't even think in context of being an African. We, the African American, who have no state or ethnic group to refer to, we created the context of being an African, and really we're the only true African, because when we left Africa there was no such thing as a Nigeria, Ghana, Sierra Leone. We left Africa. And so if we're to identify ourselves properly, we need to talk about Nigerian Americans and African Americans, Jamaican Americans and African Americans. That would be the legitimate labeling scheme if you want to set up how you form relationships. But because the African American represents the only fundamental threat to white American supremacy because us being citizen allow us the right to fight them, and we have, and we do, and we will. The other Africans who have come here because of economic deprivation at home cannot, and for the most part will not, participate in the political struggle against white supremacy because it will cost them the very reason for coming, an opportunity to economically better themselves, which I don't hold against anybody. But at the same time, if the Africans, new immigrant, and the African enslaved population was to fuse, we would be a force to reckon with in the world, because the continent of Africa represents the survival for North America and Europe.
We got 2 minutes.
Okay. Graham, I'm sorry, you can take it. Take it out.
As usual, as usual.
Yeah.
You missed a good one.
My mother's family came here from Barbados in the early part of this century. I had aunts and uncles who never became citizens. What's the point in being here if you're not going to vote and determine your political and economic future? This is what
so you understand exactly what he's
definitely.
saying.
This is what our folks in Crown Heights have to understand. When Jews come in from Russia, they come in with their paperwork. They have a packet of material. And their citizenship and everything else, paperwork is begun. You don't come here and spend 15 and 20 years and talk about, well, when I was home. You're not home no more. This is your home here. If this is your home, this is where you ought to vote. Instead of sitting here worrying about or concerning yourselves just with making money. You see, and this is where we lose out. Because if you don't own your real estate and run and manage your community, you don't have a community.
Right. Thank you, sir.
You're just residing there.
Thank you, sir. A community means you control economics, politics, and culture. If you don't do that, you ain't got.
So the next show we do, we're going to talk about the rifts amongst us. I mean, the Caribbean.
Just form it different. It's not a rift. It's not a rift among us. It's the damage to our unity by white supremacy.
Jesus said, "As a man thinketh, so is he." And that is what is critical: how we think.
Amen. Again, thanks for coming. As usual, it's been a stimulating conversation. Sorry you were late, Graham.
But it's a story.
Oh, wow.
But we had a good time.
Oh, wow.
So, you know. And there goes Emmett Till's face again. And I want the world to look at this boy. And remember, Emmett is like Diallo. Emmett is just one of the many millions of Africans destroyed in that manner.
Amen.
This is going out live, I hope.
Yes.
Oh, good. Because people need to know, because it hadn't stopped.
His mother demanded that they open that casket.
I remember as a child.
Now, this is in the center of Jet in 1955. I was 14 myself at the time, so this is what I remember.
And just as this woke us up in 55, Amadou's murder and sacrifice on the cross of white supremacy woke us up in 1999. Woke us up again.
Thank you for coming.
You were 14 and 55? You're doing good, man. Looking good.
Yeah, I thought he was younger than me.
So
he told me the other day I'm talking to an elder.
I'll be 59 next month.
I had to cool out.